Welcome back to Rise and Rouse. I'm your host, Erin Allgood, social impact strategist and nonprofit consultant. Today, I am joined by my friend Carol Hamilton. Carol is a fellow consultant and has a unique approach to promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion within organizations. She describes the essence of her work as helping people get out of their own way. As a facilitator, Carol helps organizations solidify the nuts and bolts of their programmatic work, internal operations and finances, and chart a course for the next few years. This planning work is key to getting to the meaningful mission-driven work that excites staff, volunteers, and board members. Through her unique perspective and deep understanding of strategic planning, she has helped numerous organizations navigate the complex journey toward a more inclusive and just structure and plan for the future. In this conversation, you'll hear us talk all about the experiences that shaped Carol and her work and how you can approach your own work and goal setting with an eye towards equity. Carol, thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I'm so excited to talk with you, and especially because we both do such similar work, and I'm really excited to just hear your story behind it all. I always like to just start to introduce how we actually met, and I think it was really just through Nonprofitist, which is such a fantastic consultant network.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the group that Heather Yandow has put together. It's been a really wonderful community to connect with and meet people and get to know people over time as well.
Yeah, I feel like I've got to meet just so many amazing people through that network, and including you and just so many other folks. It's enriched my professional life in a really big way.
Yeah, for sure. We always have interesting conversations, and she just does just enough facilitation to make showing up for those monthly meetings really useful.
We'll definitely give her a shout out, like in the show notes. She's gonna love
for
that.
For sure, we're gonna have a little Heather fangirl time going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to just read a little bit about your bio, and then I'll let you introduce yourself in your own words too, because it's always nice to get a little bit more color behind the introduction. So Carol helps nonprofit board staff and key volunteers become more focused and aligned. And working with her, you'll have clarity on your purpose, strategic priorities, and have a roadmap to move forward, as well as the decision-making tools for future opportunities and challenges. I'll just pause there because really and truly, you're doing nonprofit consulting, strategic planning, and so much more, I'm sure. I'll hand it off to you to do a more proper introduction.
Well, it's funny when you read that. So I've been in the nonprofit sector most of my career. I had a one professional job that kind of was the thing that got me into the sector or made me make the decision to move into the sector. But I'm just reflecting on a meeting that I was at yesterday. I'm part of a congregation, and right now we're doing mission, vision, strategy work. And we were working on a vision statement. And in this case, it was a vision of what we want the congregation to be, how we want to be. And I had put a really boring sentence in there around, I want us to work well. Like, I want things to work well. And it's not going to stay in the vision. But people were asking, well, why is that important to you? And I was like, well, we want to do all this great stuff. We want to be this wonderful community for people. We want to be a place where people can connect deeply and can then go out in the world and work on justice issues and all of those things. But if our accounting and our operations and our strategy and our board and our governance and all of those things and all programs and our staffing, if that isn't working well, we're spending all this energy on that or fighting each other about that. And instead of being focused on the real purpose of the organization around, spiritual growth in this case, we're focused on that. And so that's what kind of brings me to the work that I do, like kind of helping people get out of their own way, like make it easier. Why does it have to be so hard? And it's not sexy. I mean, I guess people can make out the strategy as sexy, but strategy is just like, okay, we want to go there. How are we going to get there? What are some steps along the way? And how are we going to know whether we made progress? It's pretty simple in a lot of ways.
I want to just pick up on one of the things you just said, which is that strategy is simple and it's also like complex too. at the same time.
Yes,
Would you,
yes. If it was too simple, it'd be pretty boring and none of us would want to do it.
Right.
But I think people can be intimidated by the word and not sure of what it really means, or not want to do it because it feels like it's so complex. And sure, there's a lot of complexity to it. And at the same time, there's some ways in which we can simplify. We can keep it straightforward.
Yeah, we don't want to overcomplicate it, especially for clients. Like they don't like it when we do that. But no, I think that's great. So I just want to hear, I guess, even more just about like, why did you choose to do this exact work in the world? How did you come to it, and what drew you to it, really?
Yeah. Probably like many people, a somewhat long and winding path. But I alluded to the very first job I had. I worked at an organization that helped people get on, I was about to say podcasts. There were no podcasts back then. Help people get on talk shows on radio. And we served all comers. So I was doing essentially kind of advertorial for publishers, lots of self-help books, but also some people whose views I really didn't align with at all and didn't support. And so when I moved back to my hometown of the DC area, I thought, this is a time when let me step into the nonprofit sector, because that'll allow me to support, do this work on behalf of causes that I really believe in. And I think that's where a lot of people come into the sector. There might be a particular cause that they're really passionate about and they want to support that work, want to move that forward, see that change. But over time, I just got more and more interested about how people are doing the work, how they work together, what gets in the way, why there's too often a rub between the aspiration and the mission that an organization has and the internal culture that they have, all of those things, which led me to getting a degree in organization development. And coming out of graduate school about 10 years ago, at that point, you have to learn all the things for the comp exam and all the theories. But over time, it just became clearer and clearer to me that the strategy side of things, working at the organizational level, was really where my strengths lie. Literally in the Strengths Finder, of my top 5, like 3 or 4 out of 5 all are in the strategy cluster. So I was like, okay, let me just admit this is where I need to be. And it also kind of took me full circle because one of the first things that had drawn me to this particular type of work was, 20 years ago when my congregation was doing its first strategic plan, and we worked with a consultant and they used appreciative inquiry to help us through that process. And I learned more about it. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. I want to be her. Yeah. So that's part of what brought me to this today.
I love that you said that the Strengths Finder showed you all of the, that you were in that strategy cluster, because I've had that same experience. And the one corporate job that I worked, it was similar. I can't remember. It wasn't the Strengths Finder. It was another one of those that I had taken assessments, and it had said that it'd be a really good general, because you've got the strategy, and then being able to help people actually execute on it and move forward. And I was like, well, I don't really like the military reference there, but yeah, okay, that works for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Because coming out of graduate school is you can do all the things. You can coach at the individual level. You can work with teams around team dynamics. You can, there's just so many different pathways that you can take, within that body of work. So it took a little while to kind of hone in on, all right, well, what's my piece of the puzzle?
And how do you, help clients, I guess, with that too? How do you help them figure out what their piece of the puzzle is? Because that's, so much of what we do as consultants is help them kind of figure that out.
Yeah, I think just starting to help them ask the question of, always starting with asking everybody what they feel like the strengths are, taking a strengths-based or appreciative kind of approach so that they can start to hone in on what makes them unique, what's kind of their special sauce, what are their stronger competencies. I think the danger, I heard someone talking about this recently that I really like the way they framed it, where it's your heart wants all of these things, and basically like you want to do more than you can. And I think many, many people who come into the sector always have bigger aspirations than are actually feasible. And so being able to hone in on, what are those things that your organization does particularly well, can build on, is an important conversation to help people have. And that's not going to be a one-time, it's going to continue to evolve over time. But oftentimes it's like, well, you've gone through a transition. What do you want to bring from the past? What are those strengths that you want to bring forward? What do you want to let go of? And I think one of the hardest things for people to do is to actually say no or let go of anything that they've been doing as an organization. And there's usually, lots of different stakeholders and a few that are really attached to that particular thing. And it's a difficult conversation if you want to actually, let go of it. But to my mind, the organization is better off once it makes some of those decisions to be able to really go a little deeper on the things that they're really good at.
I've seen so many organizations, over time that I've worked with that just, they want to keep doing everything. And I think they sometimes think it's because they're like, oh, well, we're working in complexity in some way. Like what we're dealing with is so complex. So we have to have all of these different things that we're doing to address these issues. And it does totally lead to that point where they don't actually start to name the priorities. They muddy the priorities so much and then can't gain traction in any one space.
Yeah. And I mean, their point is probably correct that whatever they are working on probably is very complex and they can't do everything. One thing I didn't mention as I was talking about my background is that I also have a podcast, and the tagline of it is, for progressive nonprofit leaders who want to do good in the world without being a martyr to the cause. And I think it's never, I won't say never, rarely malicious, or I don't even know how to phrase it, but it's like there's that weight of the world on your shoulders. The truth is you don't have to have all that weight. It's not all for you to carry, and you don't have to be that martyr, and you can do your part. Like both are true. And I think that finding that line is really hard for folks. And, unfortunately, people can kind of get caught up. And I think what they don't realize is that, and I don't think most people see it this way, but there's a little bit of ego in that, of we are going to do everything for everybody. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, you're not. I'm not. You're not. Nobody is.
Right. And I think it's no one really is going to do everything. And none of that change happens in a vacuum. You and I had talked about this when we did our recording for your podcast, and that it's so interesting to take a broader look at the field as a whole, because you can see where you fit into the puzzle pieces there, or what puzzle piece you are fitting into the bigger picture.
Well, right. Even me coming out of graduate school is like, I don't have to do teams. There are plenty of people who will work with teams. There are people who specialize in leadership teams. There are people who specialize, there are so many people who can contribute to helping organizations be more healthy. I don't need to take it all on.
Right. I know I've gone through the same journey myself. I'm like, oh, got to go update my website because I don't do all of those things anymore that I say I do. Like, yep. Starting to narrow that focus a little bit more, but it is a journey.
It takes a while.
Most definitely. What are some of the questions that are super alive for you in your work right now? What are the things that you're so interested to dig into or to spend some time thinking about?
Yeah, I think the one that I'm grappling with and trying to figure out how to do a better job of or be more mindful of is, how do we really center and infuse equity into processes that did not traditionally have those lenses: strategic planning, mapping impact, looking at your service portfolio. Those were, probably all created by white men. And so with a lens of, this is an objective process when it isn't. So I think and as a white person, wanting to continue to educate myself about, okay, what are my blind spots? What are my, pieces that I'm missing? And then how can I invite organizations into doing that work? And what's my stance as I work through a process to continue to bring that to the front? And I'm very much, I would say, figuring that out. I don't feel like I've got, answers for folks. I'm learning from lots of people, but I think it's something that really, as consultants, I think a lot more white people, let's be honest and direct about it, are thinking about, okay, for my specialty that we've been talking about, how does all of this integrate instead of being separate? And I do think there's a point at which organizations, especially if they've been white led, need to really focus on what is their, on their diversity, equity, and inclusion journey to create a foundation and probably repair harm and address all of those issues. But then there's a point at which they might be ready to then say, okay, how are we doing this throughout? People of color probably always wanted it to be all throughout, but I don't think especially for organizations that haven't had that perspective, I don't think it's something they can just step directly into.
I appreciate you
At least
saying,
that's been my experience so far.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that too, because it is, I think a lot of organizations have, I don't want to say jumped on this bandwagon, because I think that makes it sound trendy and not quite like it has the lasting effects that it should, but there's so much more of an emphasis on DEI now. And a lot of organizations that are just kind of, I'm getting asked all the time to like, oh, how do we infuse DEI into our strategic plan? And I'm like, well, there's a couple of different things I'll say, which is, one, a DEI process is also, or DEIJ, DEIJA, DEIB, whatever acronyms you want to use, to an extent, like we can infuse it into those processes, for sure, into a strategic planning process. But it also want to make sure that organizations understand that you can't substitute one for the other. And
yes, I feel like I've had organizations that kind of wanted a 2-for-1 special.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Same. And how do you explain that to them? How do they, or do they just not work with you? Because that's been in my case when I've been like, oh yeah, this is not how this works. They sometimes are like, thanks, we'll go with a different consultant.
Well, certainly that's always their prerogative. Yeah, I think I'm becoming more and more aware of what I and partnering with others need to be looking for in terms of that readiness.
Yeah.
And again, this is not any brilliance on my part. I'm very much learning from others, but, I think that's a big piece. And learning from others, that's often directly. I work in a collective of consultants that came together around doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And then we've also been asked to do strategic planning. And so that the conversation has come up, and it's through All In Consulting and the consultants that I work with there that, in addition to my own learning, have learned a lot. And I want to give a shout out to Nyako Perry and Stephen Graves and Tip Fallon for all of their work that I've been able to support that has helped me in this journey. So, but yeah, readiness is a big one. And then the other thing that I'm seeing a fair amount of is a gap between where the staff are and then where the board is. And certainly there are big generational gaps in terms of how people have learned about all of this, experienced it as they were growing up, were taught, what's the right thing to say or not say. All of that is evolving, and there can be really big differences in perspectives across generations.
And the generational thing is definitely one of those, and boards tend to be older, staff tends to be younger.
Yep.
Yep. Sometimes I've seen it not necessarily be the case, but by and large. And I've also seen some organizations navigate that really beautifully, when they've been open and receptive to really learning and changing, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the readiness, right? Is the organization ready to hear challenging feedback, open to reconsidering how they've done things? Just that openness, I think, just sticking with it, even if it gets challenging.
Yeah.
And so for strategic planning, at least in my view, and I'll be curious to hear what you say, it's thinking about it at every step of the process. So far, I haven't seen that the process is necessarily super different, but it's what are the questions that you're asking? Who are you bringing in at each stage?
No, I agree with you. It's not very different. It is being so intentional about asking those questions. And I'll tell you, like, one of the things I'm starting to do more with clients is actually bringing in the white supremacy culture characteristics
Mm-hmm.
and then giving folks an opportunity to react to that, and like how does that show up in their own organization? I mean, it has to be delicately done. Like I can't just like slap a slide up and be like, hey, where do you see this happening? Like obviously it's a little bit more facilitated than that, but I see light bulbs go off like in such a big way. And it helps people to like they will come back time and time again to that list of characteristics and start to engage with them in a way that I hadn't really seen previously before I started doing that, which has been really cool.
Yeah. And I think, again, you kind of how familiar are people with that framework?
Right.
How open are they to hearing what that actually is describing versus them interpreting that to mean you're calling me a white supremacist,
Right.
those kinds of things. So
It requires oftentimes me building trust with the organization first so that they don't think that that's what I'm doing. As you probably you see that too.
Well, right. Yeah. And I think, just saying, look, I've had to learn this as a white person too. Like
Yeah.
I'm able to see things in the culture that I wasn't able to see before. And I think, I grew up outside of the US culture. So that I think helped fast forward that process because I always, as a child, I was aware that culture exists.
Yes.
Even though I check so many boxes of privilege within our context, because of that experience and because of some other experiences, I was always paying attention to how culture works.
I might have seen this on your website, but I can't remember. Where did you grow up?
So mostly in Europe. I was in the second half of my dad's career. So I was, how was I growing up? Well, I was the kid brought along for the trip. But yeah, in Brussels and then in London. So, and from age 5 to kindergarten to 10th grade, I was overseas.
That must have been a culture shock to come back here.
It was. That was the hardest culture shock. Moving from one other country to another was not as hard as coming back to my own home country, culture. One of the places the last place I ended up working inside an organization, or second to last place I ended up working inside an organization, I was working for an association that served people in international education. So that's in the US, that means people who work with students who study abroad and people who come to the United States for their higher education. And so I worked in their training department, ran their training department, and we were redoing all of our workshops. And one of them was around intercultural communications. And so that was when somebody told me, oh, you're a global nomad. I'm like, I'm a what? You're a third culture kid. Huh? Go read this book. And I went and read the book and it was like, wait a second, why was this person reading my diary?
Oh.
But then another workshop we did was around study abroad, and they were talking about reentry shock. And these were all study abroad advisors and relatively young. So like you could just feel the anxiety level going up in this room. And I had to put my hand up and say, reading about this 25 years or like 15 years later and understanding what I went through back in 11th grade, even this much time later is helpful. So you're not going to get it perfectly right with your study abroad students, but any kind of framework that'll be helpful is going to be good. And even when we were in my graduate program, we did we did an international residency for 3 weeks, and we did it in South Africa. And we were doing work with clients there. And so really experiencing all of the cultural differences. And coming back, even after that short period of time, we all as a cohort, went through a real disorientation in terms of our reentry. It was really interesting. To me, I didn't expect it. So like, well, we haven't been there that long. But at least I kind of knew what it was as it was going on, at least a little bit after, So yeah, it's real.
Oh, it's so real. I think there's a lot of things, especially about American culture, that because we are swimming in it so often, like all the time, it's just living, breathing, swimming in it. And I think as soon as you get out of the context of it and you're in a different context, you're like, oh, we work too much. Oh, we don't, you know what I mean? Like all of those different things that we know about ourselves as Americans, but like becomes so much more jarringly apparent when we've gone somewhere else and then come back.
Yeah, we do not fetter our capitalism here. So, yeah.
I've never heard it said that way. That is fantastic.
I mean, I was just, I was like, why are we so cruel? We can be very cruel as a society to people who don't fit the dominant norm and don't fit into the economics the way we want them to. And I think also growing up other places, the other thing that I realized is that every culture has challenges. You know, every culture, if you look at it, you can say, well, they're not doing it right. You know, I mean, or every culture has norms that people assimilate that are just the way things are and are the right way to do it. So that's actually common across all cultures. So that, like, okay, yeah, we're all human. We're all fallible. We are certainly over-indexed on many things. We are way over-indexed on individualism and, really, harsh economic system. We don't have to be as cruel to ourselves as we are. But yeah, there are other things that we do well. So, It was funny. I think I learned that doing my own study abroad. We were in Poland before the fall of the Iron Curtain, the Berlin Wall and all of that. And their histories of the United States, I bought one. It was like yay big, but it was basically Howard Zinn's history of the United States. That was their version of U.S. history. And so the person I was staying with, a Polish student, asking me, well, did this happen? And did this happen? And did this happen? Slavery and genocide. And I'm like, yes. Crushing of unions. Yes. We did all of that. And I felt like by the end, I'm like, but there are a few good things about the U.S. And it was such a different place for me to be in. Had never thought of myself as super patriot or anything. I'm like, well, but we do have the Bill of Rights, and we do, we do aspire to have a democracy and have freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and we haven't yet gotten it right, and we aren't fully there, but at least we're we have these ideals that we're working towards. But yeah, it was as a, I don't know, 19-year-old, it was a wake-up call. I'm like, yep, we did all those things.
Oh, like what a great experience for you, though, to have that conversation and to be able to like reflect in that way. I had a very deep-seated sense of injustice and wanting to, right the injustices of the world, but I didn't see the full picture, I think, until I was much older.
It's also that sense of injustice that young people have that always is moving our society forward.
Yeah.
So I kind of want people to have it, and go through that phase and then push the envelope just that much further for more people and more people's rights and more recognition, and when you get older and, have boring things like a mortgage, it's not as easy to do. So I'm glad for, the righteous anger of 20-year-olds.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
It's a precious resource.
It is. I have worked with an organization called the New Hampshire Youth Movement before, and I'm like great friends with a lot of the folks who are in that organization, and they are just some of the most badass people that I know, and I feel so privileged to be around them and to call them friends too. I'm much older than them, and I feel very grateful that they let me continue to be part of those circles. I want people to retain that sense of injustice longer, even when they have a mortgage, because part of what we need is we need more multi-generational action on a lot of different things as part of, ways in which I would love to be able to see change happen. I guess one of the things that I wrestle with in my work oftentimes is, I think a lot of nonprofits, and I work with some for-profit companies too, but a lot of nonprofits, they're working to right a lot of the wrongs. They're working really hard. And of course there's nonprofits out there that are not so justice focused per se, but they're providing for the basic needs that humans have, or they're righting the wrongs or whatever they're doing, righteous causes that they're, working towards. And I also see nonprofits, I guess, as being in the nonprofit sector as being one piece of that puzzle. And it's so I have a hard time, I think, sometimes like zooming in and zooming out to kind of say, I mean, to be honest, like, is this a drop in the bucket? Like, is it really making a difference? And I know it is, but I get daunted by the bigness of it all sometimes.
Oh, for sure. And we're such a kind of patchwork quilt to be the massive Band-Aid on, the huge problems that we have. Probably the answer is it's never enough. And you never know what's going to be the tipping point.
I appreciate you saying that so much.
I mean, just thinking about some things that were seen as, okay, I'll age myself. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm at the first year of Gen X. And so, grew up in the 60s, 70s, and things that were seen as so weird then or so outside of the mainstream are just so normal now. Just in the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years, the way language has changed around gender identity or, the different ways that people are talking about recognizing aspects of white supremacy culture. I mean, that article, I don't know when it was written, in the 90s?
I think it was 99 is when it first came out. Yeah, or like
right.
2001, somewhere right around there, I think. So
here we are 20 years later, and at least for some portion of the country, it's now part of the common vocabulary in a way that, and that took 20 years of concerted work on many people's part to bring that to people. And there's somehow, and certainly now that same thing is creating this huge backlash, perhaps because it's come to this tipping point of a certain number of people are now aware and using it and thinking about things that way. But I've seen, it's like once you've lived long enough, you've seen a few of those. So I guess that also gives me a hope that if we keep nudging forward, at some point it becomes a critical mass.
Are there any other things, I guess, in your world that are like giving you hope, I guess, too? Because it's, part of the reason I put this podcast together is because like I need to go talk to other people so that I feel hopeful in the future. It was not entirely like my own self-interest, but that was a part of it. So what are the things that give you hope, I guess, in this moment?
I mean, working with younger people, FaceTiming with my grandson. That probably is the main one. He's so cute. And, I'll sing the cheesiest song of the 80s, like "We Are the World, We Are the Children," but he is. So here we go.
I mean, spending time with young, like I have one of my very best friends. Her son is 2. His name's Lyndon, and I'm his Auntie Oren.
There you go.
Which is the sweetest thing. And he calls my partner Uncle Kiss because he can't say Chris. Oh my goodness, it's the sweetest thing in the entire world. And I'm just like, I think your point though, like, yeah, I want to make the world a better place so that he can grow up in this world and so that it's better for him.
100%. Yeah. So he's also just turned 2. So isn't that beautiful, beautiful place.
Oh my goodness. I love it so much. Those kids, like, they're so freaking cute. All right. One of the things I was interested in just talking about, like with you too, knowing that we're going to have this time together is really just around like, how are you infusing joy into the work, like into a strategic planning process?
I'm one of those strange people who thinks these processes are joyful.
Yep.
So I bring that inherent strangeness to the whole thing. I just find it fun. But I think I always know that I'm doing a better job with a group when, one, they don't want to come out of their breakouts, if we're doing it on Zoom or, we're in the room and you hear laughter going on and, stuff's bubbling up. And, I think there are things like you end up with a plan and you end up with your 3 goals or whatever it is. But through the process, people get to know each other. They get to see the organization, the work that's all important to all of them in a different way by talking to each other. And I try to, bring some playfulness into it and not have it be, super serious the whole time. And it's it can be kind of that analytical side of the brain. Like I bring a lot of that, but then also the other side of like understanding how groups work together, understanding how you can create more psychological safety for people to be able to bring their ideas being able to bring them through a couple different iterations and try to have some fun along the way.
I just had wrapped a strategic planning process, and it was with with an organization. Well, it's a collective impact, effort. And so just bringing together a bunch of folk, it was place-based too. So community members, health folks who are working in public health, schools, et cetera, all those. The feedback I got as I wrapped this project up was that because all of their community ambassadors were in our strategic planning committee, the ripple effect of that is that because I made it safe for them to share their ideas and to feel comfortable in those spaces where the power dynamics are oftentimes really not in their favor, they were able to develop a lot more confidence. And so they're out at events talking to their senators. They're out, showing up differently in other spaces that they're in. And I had never thought about that as being a ripple effect of a process. And it brought tears to my eyes to hear somebody say that. I was like, oh my goodness, it's so powerful. And it sounds like that's what's happening in your, the process itself. You're helping to strengthen the organization or whomever's in that room. You're helping to strengthen those relationships as part of the process.
Yeah, strengthen the relationships. And I think also, how can you bring, words are important and words on the page and, are probably the thing that ends up, but how can you bring visuals into it? How can you, can we do a little, if we're on Zoom, a little stretch dance party or even in the room, before we get started so people are energized? How can you bring different ways of experiencing? How can you bring storytelling into the process so that kind of have different access points to the information? It's not just all about charts and graphs.
Oh, yeah. Nobody wants to see charts and graphs. It's going to get a little
some people do. Some
people do. Some people take comfort, I think, in that.
And I love a good chart, if it means something and if it tells a good story, So you can have both and.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Well, tell me how, what does it mean to give a damn for you, in your life, your work? What does that mean?
Yeah. It's funny. Because you did give me a preview that you would be asking me this question. So I've been thinking about it. And I'm like, why do I give a damn? Why have I, why have I shown up that way over the course of my life? Memory was coming up that, I don't know whether it was third grade or fourth grade, there was a kid who was bullying everybody. And somehow this group of kids, we were in a situation and they all pushed me forward to be the one to fight the bully. I'm like, why me? I ran into a person who I knew from middle school and high school. And he was like, oh yeah, I remember you always wanted to make sure the girls were allowed to play soccer too. And so all these things. But I think it really goes back to having grown up the younger sister of a person with a disability. And, we were pretty close in age. And so I was just brought along for, when we went to the playground for my brother, I was there too. And also paying attention for him, but seeing how the world didn't work for him, woke me up to the many ways in which the world doesn't work for folks. And then to want to do something about it, to not just have it, oh, well, that's how things are. But, what can we do about it? How can we change things?
We would have been friends if we grew up together. We actually would probably be a formidable pair, actually.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I was that person too back in the day. I was the one who made sure that folks didn't, that girls played soccer. I mean, that was a thing. I remember being 9 years old and getting mad because I wasn't allowed to play Little League or whatever, maybe 10 years. I don't know how old you are when you do Little League, but they put me in softball and I wanted to be in Little League and being very, very upset about that.
Well, that's so strange that actually shifted, right? Or the system got its way ultimately, because I played Little League the very first year that girls were allowed to play Little League. And, across the board. And I played on a baseball team, one of two girls. But then, over time it became softball and it became, all girls, and went back. I played for a very short time, played baseball as an adult with a women's team. And it was just so much more fun. You could throw the ball so much faster.
Yeah.
And I don't think at that time we weren't fighting against wait, why did we get kind of segregated and pushed over into this sport why is that the only option?
Right. Yeah. I played on a boys soccer team for 2 years when I was in Middle school. I don't remember. My friend Diana played with me too, but they just didn't have enough boys to field a team. So we played both on the girls team and on the boys team. And that was like such a an interesting case study in gender dynamics because
that was a really nice way to put it.
Yeah.
Because I played trumpet and I was the only girl trumpet. Yeah. An interesting case study in gender dynamics, sure. Otherwise known as hazing.
Yeah, it was, I mean.
At least my experience was.
Oh, well, for me, like most of the boys were totally fine with it. Like they already knew me or whatever. And they respected me that I was a good soccer player, and then but the coach did not. And so I had this battle with this middle-aged shitty old man, when I was probably 13 years old. And that I feel like was a dynamic that has continued through most of my life, to be honest.
Yeah, those things tend to come back around, right?
Yeah, never really went away. Never really did at all, which is kind of funny. Carol, this has been so fantastic. This is just so much fun. I really am just so very, very excited to have had the time to talk with you. Anything else you want to cover before we wrap up? Yeah,
I'd love to work with organizations that, are staffed organizations that work with supporting, helping professions. I kind of help the helpers and, in strategic planning or mapping their impact. Those are the kinds of things. And then check out Mission Impact because you get to listen to Erin talk about her work.
Yeah, your podcast is fantastic. You've got some really good people on there, and I love it when you do the little interludes where you talk about your work where you don't have a guest to. I learn so much when I.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, when I listened to your one on your, I think it was episode 70.
I've been doing them on the 10s now. Yeah, that's I've now created that kind of tradition of, I know some people do solo episodes every other. That's a lot, but every 10 episodes, it's good.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carol. I am so excited for people to be able to listen to this.
Well, thank you. It's been a great conversation.
Rise and Rouse is created and hosted by me, Erin Allgood. It is produced and edited by Steph George of Stefania Audio. Production support from Grace Cleary-Morin and Jana Krizanova. Our theme music is written and produced by Crizanova. If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a 5-star rating and review to help us reach more people. Make sure to follow Rise and Rouse wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss your chance to hear from someone who gives a damn. Follow us on Instagram @Rise and Rouse and sign up for my newsletter by going to allgoodstrategies.com.